be shorter than my introduction. But I'm just happy in a flea at a dog show to be a part of this Bernie Palooza here tonight. Bernie, you were told, as I understand, that we would get 200 people together for you, and I don't know who these 1,000 other people are in here tonight, but it is just it's an indication. Not just of Bernie's handsomeness and leadership in the Senate and et cetera, but it's an indication that there's a politics in this country that's looking for something real. Yeah. That's what's represented here tonight. There's a rumor going around that Bernie might even run for president. I don't know about that. About the odds of that. I was out, Bernie, with our friend Fred Harris, former senator from Oklahoma, recently, and he told me he's sitting around with some guys shooting the breeze at a coffee class, drinking coffee and talking. They got into baseball, and then the conversation trickled over to Lou Gehrig, the great baseball player of the Yankees, and one of the younger guys there said, "Now wait a minute, who's that? Who's Lou Gehrig?" And I said, "Well, you remember, he was the Yankee Ironman, the guy who he was in the Hall of Fame, and he died of Lou Gehrig disease." And the guy said, "Wow, what are the odds of that?" I don't know about the odds of Bernie running, but if he does run, the odds are good for America. They're good for the working family. I need to get you oriented here, Bernie. You are not just in Austin, Texas. You are in South Austin, Texas. Our unofficial slogan over here is, we're all here because we're not all there. And I think we're all here tonight, not just in this room, but out here on the lawn and still lined up trying to get in here, because we know that the powers that be are knocking down the powers that ought to be. And they're holding down the poor folks and knocking down the middle class. We've gone in 30 years' time, think about it, just 30 years' time, from Ronald Reagan's trickle-down economics. The Koch brothers tinkle-down. And yes, we can blame the Republicans for this, the nuts that are over there. Bill Moyers said that the bazaar is no longer marginal. It has come in from the fringes to sit to see the power. Take Ted Cruz, please. But it does no good to point to the other party. What's wrong with our party? We've got too many Democrats who are weaker than Canadian hot sauce when it comes to standing up for what we're supposed to stand for. Here it is. I ripped this right off of Bernie's website. Most Democratic senators will not even whisper this to their close confidants, much less put it on a website. He's offering 12 initiatives here that can restore America's middle class. Rebuild the crumbling infrastructure. Address climate change. Real tax reform, like the Robin Hood. Healthcare is a right for every American. Taking on Wall Street. Too big to fail, too big to jail. Making college affordable to everyone. Pay equity for women. Raise the minimum wage to a living wage. Don't attack the trade union movement, grow the trade union movement. Create worker co-ops. This is a program for America. Any of you remember Senator Ralph Yarber? We used to elect people who stood for things like this. Bob Eckhart and Barbara Jordan, Henry B. Gonzalez, these great leaders. This is what we've got to get back to, and this is the guy who says it again and again. George Bernard Shaw said about 100 years ago, you don't make progress by standing on guard, but by attacking and getting well hammered yourself. In fact, I used to be 6'5", I'll give you some idea. Bernie too. Bernie gets hammered all the time, but he always makes progress. He did as mayor of Burlington, Vermont, which he swept in on a 10-vote victory there some years ago. He's been a champion as a member of the House of Representatives and now as U.S. Senator. I was with Bernie just a few years ago. We were doing one of his election campaigns, and we were up there in Montpelier, their state capital, doing a political event. And after it, a guy came up wearing a big old button, the best political button I've ever seen. He said, "Wearing a button is not enough." We can't be a nation of button wearers. You've got to be stronger than that. Well, here's a guy who's got the vision. He's got the guts, not to take America back, but to move it forward. That's right. Move it forward to values, fairness, justice, and opportunity for all people. Bernie Sanders.
I don't know what to say. There are a lot of people in this room. And thank you all very much for coming out. You know, we've been traveling around California and Nevada, and I think we probably got off at the wrong spot because they told me that Texas is a conservative state. That's not. I want to thank Danny Batante for organizing. Where are you, Danny? Glenn and Jason and Judy and Greg, and mostly my old guys. We've known each other for about 30 years. So you have a treasure, a national treasure in Jim Hightower. Jim, thank you for that. All right, let me get to it. And essentially what I want to do tonight, although Jim has already given half of my speech, is to kind of talk about where we are as a nation, how we got to where we are, and then where I think we should be going. And the first point that I want to make is, and I think everybody in the room understands this, that the history of America and the fight for human dignity is a history of struggle. Frederick Douglass said it right: freedom is never given to you, it has to be fought for. When we think about workers' rights, we understand there was a time in this country's history, and certainly our right-wing friends want to bring us back to that time, when workers had virtually no rights at all. When people who needed to feed their families were 100% dependent on their employers. If the employer didn't like their color or where they came from, if the employer was not happy if they didn't work on Saturday or Sunday, that worker was fired. That worker had no rights whatsoever. And people struggled. They struggled because they said, I am a human being. I have rights. You can't do that to me. I need dignity. And unions were formed, and people fought, and people died, and people were beaten, and people went to jail. And the goal of that effort was for people to sit down and collectively negotiate contracts with workers, get decent wages and decent benefits. That struggle took decades. When we talk about civil rights, we take it for granted, especially the young people in the room, and I'm delighted to see so many young people here, that we have an African-American president of the United States. You know how that happened? That happened for 100 years. People fought against racism. I was just in Selma, Alabama a couple of weeks ago to honor the 50th anniversary of the march over that Pettus Bridge there. And I went to the museum. And you read about Birmingham, Alabama, in a 20-year period, there were 50 bombings, 50 bombings of people involved in the civil rights movement, culminating in the death, of course, of those beautiful children. There was terrorism in Birmingham, but people didn't give up. They went to jail, they struggled. In terms of women's rights, 30 years ago, there were 2 women in the United States Senate. Today, there are 21 women. Today there are women governors. When I was mayor of the city of Burlington, it was a very big deal because we appointed the first woman to be a police officer in the city of Burlington, Vermont. Today there are women generals, there are women in the military, there are women, when I was growing up, very few women went to medical school, very few women went to law school. There has been a radical transformation. How did that happen? Think it happened by accident? It happened because people struggled. 100 years ago, women didn't even have the right to vote.
Right.
Change takes place because people struggle. You talk about not so many years ago, when a family would have a child with a disability, you know what happened? As often as not, the family kept it a secret. That child was institutionalized. There was a bit of a shame having a child with a disability. Today, all over America, kids with disabilities are in our public schools. They are loved by their classmates. We're proud of them. They are part of us. They are part of humanity. That happened because people struggled. And last, one can give many examples, but maybe the last one that I want to give you in terms of struggle and in terms of change is the fight regarding gay rights. If people were sitting in this room, not decades ago, but 10 years ago, and if somebody jumped up and said, you know, I think in some of the conservative states in America, they're going to be supporting gay marriage, people in the room would have said, you are crazy. And yet, again, because of the struggle of people in the gay community and their allies, we have radically transformed that culture in America. I go out to high schools all over the state of Vermont. I go to the conservative parts of the state, and I ask the kids, I said, raise your hand, tell me what you think about gay marriage. And kids kind of shrug their shoulders, and they say, what are you talking about? What is the big deal? Which is exactly what we've always wanted in the first place. What is the big deal? My point is, here's my point, and maybe I belabored it a little too much. The point is that when millions of people stand up and fight, they win. That's it. And when people do not stand up and fight, we lose. Now, what is going on in this country is a moment which is kind of historical. It is an extraordinary moment because the problems that we face as a nation are probably more serious than at any time since the Great Depression of the 1930s. That's the truth. And if you throw in the planetary crisis of climate change, it is possible they are more serious. So the first major point that I want to make, is that the problems we face did not come down from the heavens. They are made by bad human decisions. And good human decisions can change them. Despair, one of the problems that we have got to deal with right now, and I think Jim was referring to this, is all over this country. You got a lot of bright, decent, good people, and they're saying, you know what? The situation is hopeless. You can't beat the Koch brothers, you can't beat the billionaires, you can't win, I'm giving up. That is exactly what they want us to believe. And I beg of you, do not enter that world of despair. We can win this fight if we stand together. Now, in order to win this struggle, we are going to need nothing less than a political revolution. And let me tell you what I mean by a political revolution. When, as was the case in this last election in November, when 63% of the American people chose not to vote, when 80% of young people, when 75% of low-income workers chose not to vote, What we need to do is create a momentum so that 70, 80, 90% of the people vote, and when that happens, we win hands down. We need real campaign finance reform. Because at the end of the day, whether you're concerned about jobs or wages or health care or education or climate change, we are not going to go where we have to go so long as a handful of billionaires are capable of purchasing the United States government. To my mind, Citizens United will go down in history as one of the very worst, most disgraceful decisions ever made by a U.S. Supreme Court. We have got to, through a constitutional amendment, overturn Citizens United.
Yes.
We need a Disclosure Act immediately, which will be some help. It will mean that when Charles and David Koch put their ugly 30-second ads on television, their pretty faces are going to have to be there telling the American people they approve of those ads.
Exactly.
And in my view, given the incredible wealth and income inequality in America today, we need fair elections, which means public funding of elections. Ultimately, what a political revolution means is nothing more or less than ordinary Americans understanding the importance of politics and government in their lives. Now, I know and you know. You go home and you talk to your friends and you say, you tell them, but I heard Bernie Sanders, the senator from Vermont, and they say, well, where is Vermont? And what is the United States Senate? And politics is all bullshit. I wouldn't get involved. Why did you waste your time coming out to this meeting? I got to work my third job and I can't afford to send my kids to college. And I don't have enough money to feed my family. Well, why are you involved in politics and wasting your time? And what you have to explain to them is that the Koch brothers, the second wealthiest family in America, are going to spend $900 million in the coming election cycle. They think politics is important. If they think politics is important, every working person in this country should damn well know that politics is important. About a year ago or so, there was a poll. Pollsters do these things, and they asked the American people, they said, can you tell me a year ago, which political party controls the U.S. House and which party controls the U.S. Senate? That was then, and Democrats controlled the Senate, Republicans controlled the House. 63% of the American people could not name which parties controlled the U.S. House and the Senate.
I know.
We are not going to bring about the change that we need unless people, A, understand the importance of politics, B, know what their elected officials are doing and are not doing, and C, hold them accountable.
Right.
And people don't know that. If people don't know that, Republicans could pass a budget as they did last week, and I speak as the ranking member of the Budget Committee, a budget which threw 27 million Americans off of health insurance, cut Pell Grants by $90 billion over a 10-year period, making it harder for kids to go to college, and then gave huge tax breaks to the wealthiest people in America. But if people are not involved in thinking politically, and if we don't have a media which reports this information, people are not going to know what's going on. That's got to change. What I want to do is to tell you what relatively few public officials will tell you, and that is what the hell is going on in the United States of America. And that is that for a 40-year period, not 6 years, not 12 years, a 40-year period, what we have been witnessing is the disappearance of the American middle class. That is the reality. Now, I want you all to think about this. Everybody here knows that we have seen in recent years an explosion in technology, right? Right. We have seen huge increases in worker productivity. Every worker in this room is producing more. Logically, in a rational economy, if I gave you a tool that increased your productivity by 50%, what should you expect? You should expect a significant increase in your income because you're producing more, or maybe you would be able to work significantly fewer hours. That's what you have a right to expect. But what in fact is going on now, despite the explosion of technology and the increase in productivity, workers are working longer hours and they're earning lower wages. That is absurd. That has got to change. Now, the newspapers tell you that nationally, unemployment is at about 5.5%. That's official unemployment. Well, there is another government statistic out there. And that says if you look at all of those people who have given up looking for work, of which there are many, or even more importantly, people who are working part-time when they want to work full-time. Know anybody who's working part-time when they want to work full-time? If you add all that together, you know what unemployment is in America? It is 11%. When you talk about unemployment, you know what we never talk about? Is youth unemployment. Never talk about it. That is 17%. We never talk about African American youth unemployment, which is off the charts. Bottom line is, we need to create millions of decent paying jobs in this country. And I'll talk in a moment about how I think we can do that. When we talk about what's going on in the economy, here's another issue that we never talk about. It is called poverty. Yes. We have over 40 million people in this country who are living in poverty, and the reason it's so high is that people have fallen from the middle class. These are people who are struggling to put food on the table, struggling to make sure they have gas money to put in the car so they can get to work, struggling to be able to pay for child care for their kids. When we talk about what's going on in our economy today, we should understand that 35 million Americans still, despite the modest gains of the Affordable Care Act, 35 million Americans still have no health insurance, and many more, including people in this room, are underinsured with high deductibles and high co-payments. Yeah. In my view, it is time that the United States of America join the rest of the industrialized world and guarantee health care to all people as a right, not a privilege. Talk about healthcare, it's important that everybody understand this. Got 35 million people with no health insurance. You got many more who are underinsured. And at the end of the day, guess what? We end up spending almost twice as much per person on healthcare as do the people of any other country. It is time, in my view, to move to cost-effective universal health care, which means a Medicare for all, single-payer program. When we talk about the economy, understand that since 1999, the median middle-class family, that family right in the middle of the American economy, has seen its income go down by almost $5,000 after adjusting for inflation. Incredibly, that family earned $500 less last year than it did 26 years ago. You want to know why people are angry? You want to know why people are frustrated? They're working longer and longer hours, they're working harder, and they are making less. Typical, the median male worker, that guy right in the middle of the American economy in inflation-adjusted dollars, made $783 less last year than he did 42 years ago, and that median woman worker earned $1,300 less last year than she did in 2007. And that means that the working class of this country is on the move. Problem is, we're moving in the wrong direction. And here's something, again, not talked about, something that should make us all very, very nervous. Half of all Americans have less than $10,000 in their savings account. Now, do you know what that means? And do you know why people are so stressed out? If you have less than $10,000, that means an automobile accident, a divorce, a serious illness, a crisis of one kind or another can drive you into bankruptcy and financial disaster. So what you have, and you can see it in people's faces all over America, they are scared to death. If you're 55 years of age, you're worried that some 25-year-old kid is going to take your job. If you are a young person who graduated college, you're wondering if you're going to be driving a cab for your whole life. I will relate to you a story that occurred a few years ago, and I'll never forget this. I met a woman outside of a grocery store in my hometown of Burlington, Vermont. This is what she said. She said, you know, Bernie, I'm working 3 jobs. My husband is working 3 jobs. We're working at different hours. We have 1 kid. We would like to have more kids. But we cannot be the kind of parents we want to be. That's going on all over America. To the young people, let me shock you with a statistic here. There was once a time, and the older folks in this room will remember, radical, crazy idea, where 1 worker in a family, in those days usually the man, 1 worker was able to earn enough money to take care of the entire family. Today, all over America, you got mom working, you got dad working, occasionally you have the kids working, and we still don't have enough money to pay the bills. Something is fundamentally wrong about that. Now, when we talk about the decline of the middle class, there are a lot of reasons why one can go on for hours and hours. I'm only going to go on for 3 hours, so I gotta make a little bit short. Please understand that since 2001, our nation has lost over 60,000 factories. For the young people, let me shock you again and tell you, there was once a time when you walked into a store, you could actually buy products made in the United States of America. Yes. All right? It's true. I know it's hard to believe. It's true. As a result of disastrous trade agreements, which I should tell you I have consistently voted against. Trade agreements like NAFTA, CAFTA, and permanent normal trade relations with China, which essentially said to American workers, okay, you're going to now have to compete against people in China who make $1 or $2 an hour. That's your competition. And we are going to shut down the factory and move there because we can make more money. But if we stay here, by the way, you better take a cut in your health care benefits, take a cut in your wages. And the result of all of that has been a race to the bottom. I'll tell you, not a funny story. A couple of years ago, there was a piece in the paper. And it pointed out that in Lexington, Kentucky, General Electric was in fact expanding manufacturing jobs, a couple of hundred new jobs. That was good news. And they asked the guy from GE, they said, well, how does that happen? Why are you doing this? You know, you've been to China, you're all over the world. Why are you bringing jobs back to Louisville? And he said, well, you know what? America is now becoming competitive with the rest of the world community. In other words, wages and benefits have gone down so much that we are now competitive with China. Our job is not to be competitive with China. Our job is to see China's wages go up, not our wages go down. Which, by the way, is why every person in this room, in my view, should organize and do everything you can to defeat the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It is the same old, except it may even be worse. All right, let me talk a moment about something that I know everybody in this room, especially the young people, are concerned about, and that's education. I think everybody here knows that to be educated, intellectual pursuit, is part of what makes us human. But in addition to that, we are in a highly competitive global economy, and common sense suggests that we have got to have the best educated workforce in the entire world. 30 years ago in the United States, the United States led the world in terms of the percentage of our people who graduated college. Today, we are in 12th place. Today, all over this country, in every state in the union, you have young people who are saying, you know what? Yeah, I'm smart. Yeah, I really would like to go to college, but I don't want to leave school $60,000, $70,000 in debt in an unstable economy. I'm not going. So think of what that means to our country, in that we're wasting the intellectual capital of so many bright young people. And then on top of that, you have millions of people who have graduated college and are now deeply in debt. I talked to a woman in Burlington, Vermont, 6 months ago. Her crime was that she went to medical school and is now practicing medicine with low-income people, primary health care. Exactly what we need, because we have a crisis in terms of the need of primary health care physicians. She's doing exactly what our country needs. She graduated medical school, $300,000 in debt. So what we are doing, in a sense, is saying to the young people of this country that we're going to do everything we can to make it as hard as possible for you to get an education. That is crazy. Within the next month, I will introduce legislation that will make every public college and public university tuition free. People say, is that expensive? And the answer is, yeah, it is expensive, but it is more expensive not to do that. Yes. And maybe at a time when my Republican friends just decided to put another $38 billion into the military, maybe we can cut military spending a little bit and put it into education. I've described just a little bit, and you know the story better than I do, because many of you are living that story. The story of wondering what's going to happen economically to your family next year, what's happening to your parents, what's happening to your kids. That is the story of the American middle class today. Going down and down and down. But there is another reality. What is strange about this moment in history, it's not like some tornado hit all of us and all of us are hurting. What is happening is that while the middle class is disappearing, while we have almost as many people living in poverty today as any time in the modern history of this country, there is another phenomenon going on. And that is the wealthiest people and the largest corporations are doing phenomenally well. That's the reality. Today, and I'm going to tell you what very few elected officials will tell you, but here it is. Today, the United States has by far the most unequal distribution of wealth and income of any major country on earth, and it is worse in our country today than at any time since the late 1920s. And I'm going to bore you for a moment, if I might, with some facts that are important, I think, for you to hear. And by the way, you can get all this information from my website, sanders.senate.gov.